I came home to an empty house the night my son got married, and I didn't even know it had happened. That's not a figure of speech. I didn't know. Nobody called. Nobody sent a text. I found out the way you find out about a stranger's life now. Scrolling through photos on my phone, half asleep on the couch after dinner, and there he was. My son, standing in a rented tuxedo with a woman I'd met exactly twice, both of them grinning at a camera while 100 people I'd never seen before clapped around them. The timestamp on the post said Saturday, 4:47 p.m. I had been mowing my lawn at 4:47 p.m. on Saturday. My name doesn't matter much here. What matters is that I'm 64 years old. I worked 31 years in facilities management for a school district in central Ohio. And I raised 2 kids mostly by myself after their mother, and I divorced when they were young. My daughter lives in Seattle now, and we talk every Sunday. My son, I'll call him my son, because that's what he still is, even after everything, lives about 40 minutes from me in an apartment that I had been helping him pay for since he was 26 years old. He's 31 now. His name is Trevor. I want to be careful about how I say what happened, because I'm not trying to make him into a villain. But I'm also not going to soften it in a way that makes me look like I handled everything perfectly. Because I didn't. I made my own mistakes along the way. What I can tell you is the truth, in the order it happened, and you can decide for yourself what you think of it. When Trevor was a kid, he was the one who stuck close. His sister, Jenna, was independent from about age 8. She'd go off and do her own thing, make her own friends, figure things out herself. Trevor was different. He was the one who'd come sit with me on the back porch when I was having a rough week. He'd ask me questions about my job, about the guys I worked with, about what I thought about things. I loved that about him. Still do, honestly. He had a hard time finding his footing after college. That's not unusual. He graduated with a degree in communications, which, as anyone in Ohio can tell you, doesn't open a lot of doors in a hurry. He worked a few years doing marketing for a small company, then got laid off, then picked up freelance work that came and went. By the time he was 26, he had a decent client base, but the income was inconsistent. He found an apartment in a nice part of town, nicer than he could really afford. And I told him I'd help with the rent until he got steadier, $700 a month. That was my contribution. The rent was $1,450, and he covered the other $750 plus utilities. I wasn't paying everything. I want to be clear about that because it matters to how I understood the situation. I thought of it as a bridge, not a foundation, a temporary thing. That was 5 years ago. The bridge had become the foundation somewhere along the way, and I hadn't noticed. I should tell you about Melissa. Trevor started dating her about 2.5 years ago. He brought her around for Thanksgiving the first year, and she was polite. Quiet. She answered questions in short sentences and spent most of the meal looking at her phone under the table. I told myself she was probably just nervous. Meeting your boyfriend's family isn't easy for everyone. The second time I met her was Christmas, that same year. Same dynamic. She ate quickly, helped carry one plate to the sink, and then the 2 of them left early because she had to be somewhere. After Christmas, Trevor stopped mentioning when they were doing things. I'd ask how things were going, and he'd say, "Good, busy, you know how it is." I'd ask if they were still together, and he'd say, yeah, things are great." But no more invitations. No more dropped mentions of plans or trips. It was like she became invisible in his life. As far as conversations with me went, I noticed. But I didn't push. He was 30 years old, a grown man. I figured if something was wrong, he'd tell me. If something was going well, I'd hear about it eventually. I did not anticipate how far eventually would stretch. The day I found out about the wedding, it was a Sunday in early October. I'd had a quiet weekend. Did some work in the yard, went to the grocery store, watched some football. Nothing remarkable. I made pasta for dinner and ate it at the kitchen table, which I've done by myself for 15 years, and stopped feeling sad about a long time ago. I was on the couch afterward when I opened Instagram. I only use it to keep up with my granddaughter, Jenna's daughter, who posts too many videos of her hamster, and the app showed me something in my feed from a mutual friend of Trevor's. A woman I barely knew, someone he'd gone to college with. She had posted 3 photos, The first one was of a reception hall decorated with white and gold. Flowers everywhere, long tables, candles. The second one was a group shot, maybe 15, 20 people, all dressed up, laughing at something. The third one was Trevor, standing next to Melissa, both of them in wedding clothes. The caption said, "So happy to celebrate with these two on their special day. Wishing you both all the love in the world." I put my phone down on the cushion next to me. I picked it back up. I looked at the photo again. The way you look at a word that suddenly doesn't seem like it's spelled right, even though you've seen it 1,000 times. That was my son. He had gotten married. At some point in the past. I didn't know when. I didn't know where. He had stood in a room full of people who were not me, and he had gotten married. And at no point had he thought to mention it. I sat there for a long time. I did not call him that night. I don't know why, exactly. Maybe I needed to sit with it long enough to figure out what I was actually feeling before I said anything out loud. What I felt, I can tell you now, was not anger. Not right away. It was something quieter and more confusing than anger. It was the feeling of realizing that someone has a picture of you in their head that is very different from the picture you have of yourself, and you don't know when that gap opened up or how wide it is. I thought, he doesn't think of me the way I think of myself to him. Whatever I was in his life, whatever role I occupied, it was apparently not the kind you invite to a wedding. I went to bed without calling. I lay in the dark for about an hour before I fell asleep, and what I thought about mostly was a specific Saturday about 12 years back. Trevor was 19. We'd driven down to Columbus for a football game, just the two of us, and on the way home we stopped at a diner outside of Lancaster and ate eggs and pie at 11 o'clock at night and talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing. I could still picture the yellow lights in that diner, the way he laughed when I told him some story about a coworker. How he looked like such a kid and such a grown man at the same time. I fell asleep thinking about that diner. I called him the next morning, Monday, just after 8. He answered on the third ring, and his voice was the same voice I'd been hearing since it changed back when he was 13. Easy, a little casual, the way he always was with me. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" "I wanted to talk to you," I said. "When you have a few minutes." "Sure, yeah. Everything okay?" "I'm not sure," I said. "I saw something on Instagram last night." There was a pause, not a long one, maybe 2 seconds. But in those 2 seconds, I understood that he knew exactly what I was talking about, which meant he had known this moment was coming, which meant he had been waiting for it and hadn't done anything to get ahead of it. "The photos from Denise's account," he said. "Yeah." Another pause. "Dad, I was going to tell you." I've thought a lot about what to say when someone tells you they were going to tell you something that they did not in fact tell you. What I said in that moment was, "When were you planning on doing that?" He was quiet. "Trevor, when did this happen?" 3 weeks ago, he said. September 14th. I did the math without meaning to. That was a Saturday. I had been at a hardware store on September 14th, buying weather stripping for the back door. I had stood in an aisle comparing 2 brands of foam tape while my son was getting married 40 minutes away. Where? A venue outside of Dublin. It was small, Dad. Really small. We kept it tight. Small. He used the word small. I didn't say anything. "We were going to do a bigger thing later," he said. "Like a party, you know? And you'd definitely be at that." I want to be accurate about what happened inside me when he said that. There was a brief, involuntary moment where I almost accepted it, where the part of me that has spent 64 years trying to be reasonable almost said, "Okay, I understand, that makes sense. People do that sometimes. Small ceremony, bigger party later." And then I thought about the photos. The reception hall with the white and gold flowers, the tables with candles, the 20 people in the group shot, none of whom were me. "Trevor," I said, "that didn't look small." Silence. There were a lot of people in those photos. Those were just from the after-dinner thing. Some of Melissa's friends came. I see. He started talking faster then, about how they'd wanted to keep it low-key, about how Melissa's family was complicated, and they hadn't wanted a big family situation, about how he should have told me sooner. And he knew that, and he was sorry. He said sorry 3 or 4 times in about 90 seconds. I let him finish. Then I said, I want you to know that I'm not calling to yell at you. I'm not angry right now. But I need a few days to think about some things. Dad, a few days, I said. I'll call you. I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table and I drank my coffee and I thought about things. What I thought about, specifically, was the arrangement. The $700 a month. I had been sending that money every single month, first of every month, without exception, for 5 years. I'd sent it when I was in the hospital for 3 days with a kidney stone and forgot to pay my own electric bill. I'd sent it the month I had to replace my furnace and had to pull from savings. I'd sent it without hesitation, without resentment, without conditions. Because I believed I was helping my son build something. What I had actually been doing, I now understood, was paying for a life I was not invited to participate in. I want to be fair. I know money doesn't buy a place at the table. I wasn't under the impression that my contribution purchased my son's affection or obligated him to include me in his decisions. That's not how I understood our relationship. What I understood was that he knew I was struggling alongside him. In my own way, watching my retirement savings a little more carefully than I'd hoped to, working the math every month to make sure I could cover his rent and still cover my own bills. And he had decided, somewhere along the line, that this was just a thing that happened, like a utility. Something that ran in the background while he made other choices. I thought about what he'd said. Small. Low key. I went online and looked up the venue outside of Dublin. It was a restored barn on about 8 acres. Their standard wedding package started at $6,000. I closed the browser. I made a phone call to my travel agent. Yes, I still have a travel agent. Her name is Pat. She's been helping me book things for 20 years. And I asked her what was available for Alaska. I'd been talking about seeing Alaska since I retired 2 years ago, and never actually done it. 2 weeks. I wanted to see the glaciers before they were gone. Pat called me back that afternoon with options. I booked a 10-day small ship cruise out of Juneau, departing the following Friday. A little over $3,000, which was about 4.5 months of what I'd been sending my son. Then I called my bank and canceled the recurring transfer. I did not call Trevor to tell him. I know that part will seem pointed to some people. Cold, even. But I want to explain my thinking, because it wasn't cruelty. What I had done for 5 years was send money every month without being asked, simply because I understood it was needed and I was in a position to help. I had not made an announcement every month about the transfer. I had not called first of every month to say, hey, just send it. The money moved quietly, the way help between family members is supposed to move. So it seemed consistent, somehow, to let it stop the same way. He had not told me things. I did not tell him things. I finished packing on Thursday night, and Friday morning, I drove to the airport and flew to Seattle to stay with Jenna for one night before the cruise departed. I told Jenna the whole story over dinner. She listened without interrupting, which is something I've always admired about her. When I finished, she sat back and said, Dad, I'm so sorry. That was wrong of him. She didn't try to explain it away or offer his perspective, or suggest maybe I was being too hard on him. She just said it was wrong. That meant more to me than I can probably explain. Alaska was extraordinary. I don't say that lightly. I'm not someone who uses words like extraordinary. But there is no other word for standing on the deck of a small ship at 6 in the morning while a glacier calves in front of you. A chunk of ice the size of a small building breaking off and dropping into the water, and understanding, in your body, that the planet is enormous and ancient and will be here long after your particular problems have dissolved into nothing. I hiked in Skagway. I ate king crab at a place on the water in Ketchikan. I watched humpback whales surface about 30 yards from the ship, and I stood at the railing for an hour just watching them breathe. For the first 4 days, I barely thought about Trevor. The first message came on day 5, a text. Hey Dad, everything okay? Haven't heard from you. I was on a shuttle back from a trail. I read the message and put my phone back in my pocket. The second message came 2 days later. Dad, I'm getting a little worried. Can you call me? I was on the ship by then, somewhere in the inside passage. I thought about calling, I didn't. The third message was different. It came on a Tuesday morning. and it was longer than a text. Dad, I need to talk to you. The rent was due on the 1st, and the transfer didn't come through. I checked the account, and it looks like the automatic payment was canceled. Can you call me? I have bills due, and I'm trying to figure out what happened. I read that message sitting on a chair on the outside deck with a cup of coffee. The sky was gray and flat and beautiful. The water was dark green. I thought, he doesn't know that I know about the transfer. He thinks it was a mistake. I typed back, it wasn't a mistake. Then I put the phone down and watched the water. He called 4 times in the next 2 hours. I let it go to voicemail each time. I wasn't trying to be dramatic about it. I just wasn't ready to have the conversation while I was in the middle of a glacier and also in the middle of figuring out what I actually wanted to say. I listened to the voicemails. The first was asking me to call back. The second was more urgent. The rent was already 5 days late. There'd be a fee. Could I please just call? The third one, his voice had changed. He said, Dad, is this about the wedding? I know that's why. I know. I need you to call me. Please. The fourth voicemail was Melissa. I had never heard her speak more than a few sentences at a time in the 2.5 years I'd known she existed. She had a clear, flat voice, and she said, This is really inappropriate. Trevor is upset, and you're clearly doing this on purpose. Withholding money over a personal grievance is manipulative and childish, and you should be ashamed of yourself. I listened to that one twice. Then I called Trevor. He picked up on the first ring. Dad, I want to address what your wife said in her voicemail first, I told him. Because it's important. She said I'm withholding money over a personal grievance. I need you to understand that the money I was sending you was never guaranteed. It was never a contract. It was a gift, given voluntarily every month for 5 years, because I wanted to help you. Gifts can stop. That's the nature of a gift. He was quiet. I'm not withholding anything, because there's nothing I owed you in the first place. I've been helping you because I love you and because I chose to. I stopped because I chose to. Those are both my choices to make. Dad. Come on. Trevor, I want to ask you something, and I need you to actually think about it before you answer. I watched a line of spruce trees passing along the shoreline. Why wasn't I at your wedding? The silence stretched out. Because Melissa's family situation is complicated. That's an explanation about Melissa's family. I'm asking about me. Why wasn't I there? Was it discussed? Did you say we should invite my dad and it got talked down? Or did it not come up? More silence. I don't want to fight. I'm not fighting, I said. I'm asking a question. I'd like to know whether my son's wedding guest list was something you had any say in at all, or whether I was excluded from something that was mine to be excluded from. He said quietly, We talked about it. And Melissa thought it would be easier to keep it to just her side. Her family there's a lot of history there, and she thought bringing in my family would make it more complicated. I let that sit for a moment. Her family, I said. Her parents and her sisters. So Melissa's parents were there. Yeah, but I wasn't, Dad. I'm not asking you to defend it, I said. I'm just asking you to understand what it feels like to hear that. I've been sending $700 a month to help you build a life. And when you built the most important moment of that life, your wife's family was invited and I was not. Not because of anything I did, just because it was easier. He didn't say anything for a while. When he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter. I should have told you, I know. I handled it wrong. Yeah, I said, you did. I was afraid you'd be hurt. I am hurt, Trevor. I'm very hurt. Afraid of it and avoiding it isn't the same as preventing it. It just means I found out from a stranger's Instagram account instead of from you. I heard him exhale. Is there anything I can say right now that would fix this? No, I said. But I'm not looking for it to be fixed right now. I'm looking for you to understand what actually happened. So we can talk honestly about it eventually. That's all. We talked for another 20 minutes. Not about the money specifically. I said I'd have to think about whether and how I could continue helping. And that wasn't a threat, it was just the truth. I said my own retirement situation was something I needed to take seriously, and I couldn't make promises I wasn't sure I could keep. He asked where I was. When I told him I was on a ship in Alaska, he was quiet for a second, and then he said, Of course you are, Dad. It wasn't mean the way he said it. It sounded almost like the beginning of a smile. I got home on a Thursday night. My house was the same as I'd left it. The yard had gotten a little long. There were a few pieces of mail I dealt with over the weekend. Trevor texted me that Friday to ask if we could talk. I texted back, "Give me a couple of weeks." He did. He waited 2 weeks and then called. We talked for an hour. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years, maybe ever. He told me things about his relationship with Melissa that I hadn't known, how strong her opinions were about his family, specifically about me, going back to early in the relationship. He hadn't wanted to put me in the middle of it, he said. He hadn't wanted to tell me that someone he loved had decided, for her own reasons, that I was a problem to be managed. I understood that. I didn't like it, but I understood it. Being stuck between a parent and a partner is a genuinely hard place to be, and I don't have perfect clarity on what I would have done at 31. What I told him was this. I wasn't going to re-establish the monthly payment, not because I was punishing him, but because it had gone on too long and had started to mean the wrong things on both sides. He needed to figure out his finances as a married couple, and I needed to stop feeling responsible for a household that wasn't mine. If something came up, a real emergency, an unexpected hardship, he could talk to me and we'd figure it out together. But the automatic transfer, the quiet $700 every month, that was over. He didn't argue. He also told me that he was sorry. He said it once, plainly, without hedging. I said I knew, and I accepted it, and that was that. We've talked every couple of weeks since then. It's different now than it was. More careful in some ways, more honest in others. Melissa and I have not spoken since the voicemail. I don't know what the future of that looks like. What I know is that I came home from Alaska feeling lighter than I had in years. Not because anything was resolved. Most of it wasn't, not yet, but because I had stopped pretending that a one-sided arrangement was the same thing as a relationship. I had been so focused on being useful, on being the father who showed up financially, that I hadn't asked myself, in a long time, whether I was actually present, whether I was seen, whether the people I was helping could even tell the difference between my love and my direct deposit. I retired 2 years ago. I have a pension, and I have Social Security, and I have a small savings account I try not to touch. I am not wealthy. I am not going to be wealthy. But I have enough, and I have my health, and I have more time ahead of me than I sometimes remember. I have another trip planned for next spring. Iceland. I've always wanted to see the northern lights before I'm too old to stand out in the cold staring up at them. I'm not waiting on anyone's permission to go.